Here at Charlie Crimebuster, we welcome comments, suggestions, opinions, and whether you agree or disagree with our view on a topic, we still want to hear from you. Reach out with a shout-out. Email Charlie at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, PeacemakerNetwork.com, and also thank those of you who already support our podcast. Did you know that your donations not only help with this podcast, but also support the brave men and women, first responders, law enforcement, correction officers, security personnel, and our military? You too can donate, as well as become a monthly badge member. That's BADGE member by simply subscribing to PeacemakerNetwork.com. That's PeacemakerNetwork.com. And if you're a true crime junkie, we would like to encourage you to binge-cast by listening to our podcasts located on many of the popular podcast platforms. Simply search for Charlie Crimebuster, or you can ask your smart speaker to play Charlie Crimebuster. But since you're streaming us here on YouTube tonight, simply click on the subscribe button and you'll be notified each time we drop a new episode. So please do us that huge favor and press that subscribe button right now. And we thank you.
Well, in the Karen Reed murder retrial, we're involved in the battle of the experts. James Buckland and I are going to talk about that and a whole lot more on this episode of Charlie's Crime Talk. We're glad to have you on board the Charlie Crime Train today. James, how you been doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Charlie. How about yourself? How's things going with you?
Oh, man, I tell you what a trial this is. We're in a tremendous trial. And, it's I guess it's what you would call crime junkie heaven.
Yeah. This is going to be one.
Go
ahead.
No, I said, you talk about a battle of the experts. We're right in the midst of it, and we'll be telling the folks about it, of course, today. By the way, on the trial today, something that has been interesting, James, is that, the trial was dark today, but when we're recording this, we didn't have any trial. They said because it was too hot. and that there was a lot of heat, I guess, there. And that courtroom is rather hot, and they have the fan and the air conditioner, and I think they're working on that, this sort of thing. And the judge said we're ahead of schedule, so we're just going to take a day off today. They did half day yesterday, take a day off today, but tomorrow, which is Friday, as we record this, they're going to be back in trial. James, what do you think? I think if I was a juror, I'd rather not have so many days off. I'd want to get it over with and get through it.
Yeah, I mean, they have jobs. They have lives. And we would like to thank our sponsor, PeacemakerNetwork.com, and all those of you who support our podcast. You are obviously aware that your donations are going a long way to support our brave men and women, first responders, law enforcement, correction officers, security personnel, and our military. But if you haven't donated yet, and you're just a listener, well, first of all, thank you. And click that like button or subscribe button. But if you would like to donate to the Peacemaker Network, you can go to peacemakernetwork.com and become a badge member, BADGE member, by simply subscribing to peacemakernetwork.com. And all of our music and sound effects in our show are provided by our friends and contributors to pixabay.com. They're responsible for making our podcast a little more enjoyable and exciting. That's pixabay.com. And if you're a true crime junkie and we would like to encourage you to binge cast. In other words, sit on your couch and just do nothing but play podcasts of Charlie Crimebuster. And you can do that by listening to our podcasts located on many of the popular podcast platforms. Just simply search for Charlie Crimebuster, or you can say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. Regardless of your podcast platform preference, and you have enjoyed our show, please click that subscribe button or like button. Now, if you have a comment or a suggestion or an opinion, and whether you agree or disagree with any view of the topics that we discuss on this show, we still want to hear from you. So reach out with a shout out. Email Charlie, charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. And there we go. We got the housekeeping out of the way.
There we go. Yep. We're ready to roll another one.
One little statement here. I made the comment earlier about this is this is an interesting case where they've practically thrown everything at the wall to see if it'll stick. This is a good case study for future law students because
Yeah,
anything and everything that could go wrong in a case, the fact that it was mishandled, the investigation was mishandled. A lot of the, it was through the first trial did not work out. It was a mistrial, so they had to go back to her for the second trial.
no doubt. But and beyond that, think about this, James. What a case for those of us who have a law enforcement background. What an opportunity to teach police officers
Oh
by
yeah.
getting, bring this in for training. Bring
Hmm.
this into the academy. This case ought to be brought right forth to the academy to see, how cutting corners and
Yeah.
not doing it the correct way, how it can take a simple case that appeared to be a slam dunk and suddenly make it into the re-murder trial of the century.
What
I mean,
not
how
to
not
do?
to do it,
Yeah.
yeah, how not to investigate a case. You think about it, that so many mistakes
Red so
made
red
that,
solo cups.
yeah, exactly, and if this case had been handled correctly, then we would not be here today. I mean,
Right.
either one way or the other. Either Karen Reed would be convicted, or another person would be convicted of this crime if it had simply been investigated the correct way. And because it wasn't, this has just blown way out of proportion, and it's become, it's become very tricky. I mean, you have people divided and feeling very, very passionate
Yeah.
about both sides.
Yeah. I mean, this story has all the different turns and twists and everything you even mentioned on the podcast about, all the corners and the turns and twists that as we ride the Charlie train, we have Trooper Paul, we have the Proctor Factor, we have Hitman Higgins, we
Yeah,
we got a
yeah.
whole
Got
slew
got
of,
got a whole slew of it. No doubt about it. No
and
doubt
and
about it.
I'm going to ask you some questions later on about the
Okay.
memory hook because
Sure. Yeah.
I want people to know what those memory hooks. Matter of fact, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, just like we're talking about this case, this is the second trial. And the first trial went almost 2 months, all hundreds of witnesses. And you think about this, even this trial, and this is going to be a shorter trial, not a whole lot, but a little shorter
Hmm.
from all that we can understand than the first trial. But even this, we're talking about 10 weeks of trial. Now, normally trials go maybe 1 or 2 weeks.
Hmm.
This
Hmm.
one has gone 10 weeks.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, you have multiple experts, an abundance of lawyers, on both sides. You got all kinds of lawyers there, tons of witnesses, almost a 10-week trial, a boatload of evidence, both for the prosecution and the defense. So, with all that out there, you need something to kind of tie it together and help you to remember what the really important things are. As us crime junkies often do, we find ourselves very often going down rabbit holes.
Hmm.
We
Hmm.
get in one area and just keep digging in that one area, and we forget that there's a whole lot of other territory there to do it. So I thought what we would do for our Charlie listeners is to, come across with some memory hooks that would help us to really kind of put everything in place of what's happening, especially the evidence.
Hmm.
And we got, you came up with a great one the other day, Hitman Higgins. I like that. So I mean, it's just a simple little memory hook that kind of help you put all of this that's out there into a bundle so that you can know where this trial is going to be decided at. And I believe it will be in a lot of these memory hooks that we're talked about today and we have been talking about.
Yeah, you're right. So one of those was the Proctor Factor that we heard about already in one of the prior podcasts. Is there anything that's come up in the Proctor Factor this week?
Yeah, in fact there has and if you've been following us folks, you know the Proctor Factor. We're talking about Michael Proctor, who was the lead investigator in this case. And, I don't know, James, that there's ever been a trial where they had a retrial and the lead investigator wasn't even called to the stand.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it appears that that's happening in this one. And for those of you, if you were just joining us today and kind of new to us and haven't been following the Proctor Factor, we're talking about Michael Proctor, the lead investigator, who did some very, very inappropriate things. And because he cut the corners and did those inappropriate things, he became a real scapegoat for the defense's theory, alleging that lots of evidence in this case was actually planted by cops and not evidence in reality. So
Mm-hmm.
we call it the Proctor Factor. The Alan Jackson, in his opening statement in the second trial, said Proctor is a cancer that covers everything
Mm-hmm.
in the case. And so I do think that that's true, that what we're seeing, especially with the defense. But beyond that, it was mentioned in this last week that we're covering with the podcast. In a very interesting way, it was mentioned at the end of the week last week. There was a hearing outside the ears of the jury, where the defense was wanting to call another police officer who happened to be involved in that chain of texts, those terrible texts that he sent. And boy, what an embarrassment that was for him in the first trial.
Mm-hmm.
You could, when for those of us who watched the first trial, you talk about destroying somebody on the stand. I thought Sturgis was destroyed, but Michael Proctor was just, he was humiliated on the stand
Yeah.
when he had to read his own text saying those terrible things about the person that he was investigating, and he was supposed to be non-biased about it, and yet he did. So now the defense is, it appears, have been trying at the end of this week. They were trying to be able to introduce those texts by having someone read those texts who had received the texts. And of course, the prosecution is coming out and saying, no, you can't do that. That's hearsay. You can't really do it that way. And so at the end of last week, we hadn't heard at that time whether the judge was going to allow them to do it or not. And so they were going to try to introduce the text that Proctor gave by calling somebody else to it. So that brings me another question, James. It appears to me that this lead investigator, who was such a big part of the last case, that they may not be calling him to the stand.
That's what
and
it sounds
and
like.
and why? Why
Right.
why
Why?
why wouldn't first of all, why wouldn't the prosecution call him?
Right.
Because he was the lead investigator of the other place. Almost, you could almost kind of think, well, I realize why, because he was such an embarrassment to the investigation that they didn't want to call him. But you'd almost think that the prosecution would want to call him and, kind of get the bad over with and try to put a good spin on it. Then
Mm-hmm.
why would not the defense call him and then call him to the stand and do the same thing? So the Proctor factor is a real factor, and it's almost a puzzling factor as to why neither the prosecution nor the defense has called Michael Proctor.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And it doesn't appear they will.
Yeah, it appears that they're not going to.
Now the other thing that's happened this week, because we always give people a little bonus of what's happened since the last podcast. We don't tell you everything that's happened because that's going to be the next podcast that we'll
Right.
release this weekend. But
Exactly.
one little caveat that we can give them, I guess, is the fact that it appears now that the defense has made a motion, and you're going to see as this trial winds down, you're going to see a lot of motions that's going to
Mm-hmm.
come by both sides. But they've made a motion now for what is called a missing witness
Yep.
deal, which basically would, if the judge would agree to it for the defense could then argue in their closing factor, see here, the prosecution would not even call Michael Proctor.
Right.
He's
Right.
missing from it. The prosecution won't even call him because it was that bad and that crooked, and he did that bad of a job,
Right.
and use that. That's called a missing witness. So, and I think that the judge should allow them to do that because I
I
think that's a
agree.
very, very big part. And that may be the reason why the defense is not calling him, because they would rather argue that at
Exactly.
the end rather than put him on the stand.
Exactly.
And there's always a risk, there's risk and reward with whatever witness you call to the stand. And so there is a reward, certainly, because they could certainly embarrass him with those texts, but at the same time, he might come across to one juror to say, well, yeah, he was a rotten guy and he said some bad things, but I don't think that he really planted evidence. But right
Hmm.
now, he's the big boogeyman in the eyes of the jury,
Right.
and they
Right.
probably the defense wants him to stay the boogeyman.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of factors, there was another memory hook called the BB factor. How does it relate to the case?
Well, the BB factor is simply what we call the broken bone factor, and that is a very important part of this case because the defense is alleging that there's no way that Karen Reed could back that SUV at over 20 mile per hour and hit him and there not be any broken bones
Mm-hmm.
whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And there wasn't any broken bones in the autopsy. Now there's been a big thing about, well, did they X-ray him? They did not X-ray him, so the prosecution tried to say there could have been a broken bone, but there wasn't an X-ray. But she did much more than X-ray. She actually cut him open, and they cut
Yeah.
his
Yeah.
legs, and everything. So they would have found broken bones. There was no broken bones there. So the broken bones thing is really, I think, a really strong statement by the defense that if he had gone through that, he would have had a broken bones, particularly if it hit his arm at that speed, or his leg or something like that. And so this week, we said last week that they certainly needed a Hail Mary in order to stay into the game with the prosecution. So I believe that they did have their Hail Mary, and that was with one of the Dr. Welcher, who came to the stand. And when Dr. Welcher came to the stand, which was for the prosecution, I don't know if you remember, James, but even before this trial got into the real trial phase, you and I were talking on Crime Talk, and one of the questions you asked me is in this next trial, what would you do different by the prosecution?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
I
then we said,
remember.
what would you do by the defense?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I said, if I was a prosecution, I would find someone out there who had similar injuries, who had been hit by a vehicle,
Right.
and I would say, look here, this could happen. He could look that way. Well, that's exactly what they did. They must have been listening to us, James.
They must have.
I don't think they listened to us, but that I said I would do that, and that's what they did. One thing Dr. Walter did, he found a case where a pedestrian had been hit by a car and unfortunately killed
Uh-huh.
by a car, and there was not one broken bone in that person. There was a couple cracked ribs, but that's cracked. It wasn't broken. So I thought it was very brilliant that they did. The only problem was what happened, James, is they brought this chart up, and it was really, really cool looking chart, and it showed all the injuries that this guy had, who had been hit by this car, and that all these injuries, liver, internal injuries, all kinds of other injuries, but yet not one single bone broken. Well, they were trying to prove that you could get hit by a car and not have a broken bone, but the only problem is, I think they went too far. I
Yeah.
mean, this guy was so banged up
Yeah.
that Alan Jackson, as smart as he is, all he has to do is get up and say, yeah, now look at all this, folks. That's what happens when you're hit by a car. John
Exactly.
O'Keefe didn't have nearly any of those injuries that you brought to us at this point.
Exactly. Yep.
So
Exactly.
I think they may have overplayed themselves in
I
that.
I agree with you there.
But
Absolutely.
Dr. Welcher did come up, and he did have he did, point out the fact, and I'm sure that there's other cases where people have been hit by a car and bones weren't broken, but I think in most situations you would see broken bones if hit by a car like that. Not every
Sure.
situation, but most of them.
Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
so the broken bones is a really important part of it, and yet we have to hear yet from the ARCA guys who will be coming on the next week or so, and it's going to be interesting to see how they handle the BB factor, what they say about the
Right.
broken bones, because this will be the defense's side time to do it. We know now what the prosecution has said, but there are other witnesses that are coming this week and next week that will also be factoring in on the BB factor. So folks pay close attention to what we call the BB factor.
Very good. Very good. Well, let's close out that segment and open up take a real brief moment to kind of set back and reflect and tell us about the crazy crook for this week.
Well, I'm sorry to tell you, James, it's another Florida guy.
Yeah, I knew that was coming.
Yeah, yeah. I try to find people out of Florida, but there's just so many in Florida.
Yeah, yeah.
Where you and I are from, we're surrounded by crazy people.
I'm just glad I'm not R1.
Not our one, yeah. Crazy people.
Yeah.
This would happen actually nearby us. I'm in Volusia County, just one county up, a county called Flagler County.
Hmm.
And there was this guy actually who his alleged crime took place in Volusia County, but he was hiding out in Flagler County. And so the police had a tip. They went up to the house. His name was Terod Weaver, 37 years of age. He was wanted by battery by strangulation. And they were at this house looking for him, and they brought the canine in. Now, I got to tell you, uh, being out there on the street, there's just something about it when you bring a canine on the scene. I mean,
Exactly. Yep.
it can get people's attention. It's just years ago we used to say when you go to the shotgun and you rack that shotgun, it gets people's attention.
Yep.
And in this situation though, they brought the canine and the guy, the crazy guy, he was hiding out up in the attic of this house.
Yep.
But when that dog came onto the scene and started sniffing, he got so excited he stepped off of one of the boards there and right down the ceiling he comes. I mean, he just falls right into the laps of the deputies that are there in the living room. He just falls right in the middle of them. And so one of the
Uh,
deputies said, "Man, it'd been a whole lot easier if you just gave yourself up, buddy. Then
yeah.
you would not have to repair the ceiling."
Right.
So,
Right.
so this crazy idiot who thought he would hide in the attic only to misstep and fall through the attic is our crazy crook for the week.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Back to our Karen Reed. So we break this down again. Tell us about the tail of the tail light.
The tail of the tail light. This to me has been probably one of the hardest things for me to get my hands around.
Yeah. Same here.
Um, you know, um, I just I hate to think that police officers would be corrupt. I hate to think that they would do something really nefarious.
Hmm.
But there's only one or two ways that tail light could get to the yard there where John O'Keefe lay at 34 Fern Street. And there was taillight there. No disputing that, and no disputing really that the pieces of that taillight came from Karen Reed's vehicle. The question is, how did it get there?
Right.
And it only got there one or two ways. Either Karen Reed hit him that
Hmm.
night
Hmm.
backing up, and that taillight cracked, and that there or it was planted. I mean that's the only there's no other way that you can get around it. And that's why at the very beginning I thought this was really a slam dunk because her taillight's cracked, and taillight is found in the yard. But then you start thinking about all these other things. You think about the fact that the Canton Police Department, when they were there that morning, and they did a search of the area, and they didn't find any tail light at that time. Of course, it was a blizzard. You think about the fact that earlier that morning, as they were on their way to try to find John O'Keefe, Karen's car actually backed out of the garage there at O'Keefe's house and actually hit O'Keefe's vehicle.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
and I mean, and that's proven too. I mean, you can see
Yeah.
when they have that video, you can see that other car move.
Yep.
So there was an impact there.
Definitely.
Now Welcher is saying the key witness, one of the last witnesses that the prosecution brought on, is saying that strike was not heavy enough to cause a crack in the tail light, and secondly, he's saying that it wasn't at the right angle. But Ark is going to say something else, I'm sure,
Sure.
and there's going to be that battle of the experts that we're talking about in this place. But then on top of that, there's we've already covered in the trial that there was a video that showed that Proctor, the Proctor Factor again, that the Proctor, the lead investigator, was actually seen in the Sally Port at the back of the car,
Yep.
spending some time right over that tail light.
Yep.
Which, I mean, that in itself is not wrong. I mean, if you're an investigator, you're going to look at it, but it does give credence to the fact that there was opportunity to plant the tail light.
Yep.
Not saying he did it, but there was opportunity to do it.
Reasonable doubt.
So yeah, so this tail light, is a very very critical part. And if you're a juror, you're on this jury. Maybe what you think happened at the tail light might even be, the way you go.
Mm, yeah.
If you think that Karen Reed did it, then that's the reason it's there. Or if you think it was planted, you might go one way or the other, or you may go down through the middle and say, I think she did it, but there's doubt there. I mean, either way you go at it.
Did they take pictures of the solo cups when they were collecting the evidence with the leaf blower?
Yeah, there's
Were
been
the tail light fragments in there?
no, there wasn't any taillight fragments found in the solo cups.
I rest my case.
Well, then I could come back and say they were there, but the leaf blower blew them away. Because if it's not crazy enough to
Yeah.
to to get evidence in a red solo cup, just hang on, it gets crazier.
Yeah.
Now you're going to use a leaf blower on the snow to blow evidence away, right?
Exactly.
Which gets us back to that, what again, hey, police officers and attorneys, watch this. This is how not to investigate a scene.
Exactly. Well, tell us about Clockgate. Clockgate.
Yeah, this is something that's even become more prominent in this trial than the other trial because, as anybody knows, in your vehicle, all of us have vehicles that have clocks in them, and sometimes it gets me because I have to figure out how to change that clock every time we have a time change.
Right, right. Exactly.
But we have our clocks in our vehicles, and then we have our clocks on our cell phones. So what the prosecution is saying is that there was what they call a data stream. There was a triggering event when they began to look at her vehicle, where it sees that the vehicle went in reverse for a period of time. And during that triggering event, the prosecution is saying they believe that's when Karen Reed hit John O'Keefe after she let him out of the car that day, that night, or that early that morning. And they're saying that they can prove that because they're going to synchronize the fact that that triggering event happened on the clock of the car at the same time that John O'Keefe's phone was locked up or was locked, and which usually you have to do that as a human being to push it to lock your phone. So they're
Hmm.
saying it happened at the same time. The only problem is that there is a variance always, most always, in the car's clock and the cell phone. So, like in other words, if you had your phone, and you have a time, and you have time in your car, it's not always right to the second.
Right.
And in this situation, those seconds really count because while the prosecution says it happened simultaneously with that variance, the defense is saying no, no, no. it happened after that triggering event, so therefore she could not have hit him because his clock or his phone said that it was locked after that triggering event.
Right.
So that those seconds are just really really critical. So in the trial, the prosecution's experts are saying, that they had to come back and amend what they said that variance was because it was lining up too close to the defense's line. So they
Exactly.
did an amendment right in the middle of the trial. Hardly unheard of that they would change their report right in the middle of the trial, but they did that. And so, they're saying it. So now here comes our prosecution. And remember now what has happened this past week is the prosecution rested their case, and so now it's time for the defense to put on their case. We heard from Welcher, Dr. Welcher, who I believe did indeed do that Hail Mary and put the prosecution more on line of it. Because something else that Welcher did too that I want to say before we get back to the clock gate was he did an example where he would actually put his arm out and another SUV, same just like Karen Reed's, same model, came back and hit his arm at 2 to 3 miles per hour. And he had blue paint there, and that blue paint transferred to his arm, and he would show a sketch that it almost matched, just about identical, where the cuts were on John O'Keefe, and so there was blue paint in that area. And so that's another thing that Welcher did that I think could put in the mind of some jury well, yeah, that's how he got those cuts on his arm. But however, remember he did that at 2 or 3 miles per hour.
Right.
The vehicle that Karen Reed they're saying went 23 or 24 miles per hour.
Exactly.
So it doesn't make sense to me that it would look the same if it was 23, 24 miles per hour. Now,
Exactly.
obviously, you don't expect the expert to get out there and get hit 23, 24 miles an hour, but he could have used a crash dummy,
Exactly.
but he didn't. So why didn't he use a
Why
crash
didn't?
dummy?
Yep.
Again, there's some of that doubt that you're looking at there.
Exactly.
I mean, if
Exactly.
you wanted if you wanted a real example, let it hit it at 23, 24 miles per hour. Because ARC is going to say that that if that hit at 23, 24 miles per hour, it wouldn't look that way. It probably broken bones. Like we're
Right.
talking about.
Right.
So that Welcher is coming into that. So Welcher is using the Sturgis calculations on how to get that variance on the clock. Now, the new witness is a guy that they called that the prosecution to kind of battle that battle of the experts. Matthew DeSogra, he says that there's various ways you can calculate that variance, and there's about 30 different ways you can get to calculate what that variance between the two clocks was. And he says that 25 of those 30 ways would lean to support the defense's theory of it rather than the prosecution's
Prosecution.
theory of it.
Yeah.
And only maybe 3 to 5 out of 30 would go the prosecution's way. So, man, it's a battle of the experts. I mean, all these
Definitely.
guys appear to be smart, but they're saying the total opposite about it. And so it's going to be up to these jurors, and what a job they're going to have. They're going to have to determine this. Which experts they believe, and keep in mind they haven't even heard the ARCA guys yet.
Exactly.
And you and I talked about how impressed we were with ARCA.
Exactly. Yep.
They were just really, really sharp guys, with it. So,
Well, do you think Brennan and the prosecution got their Hail Mary
yeah,
in
I
this
think they
trial?
did. I
You
think
think
they
they
did.
did?
There was some new stuff this time. That it was really it really grabbed my attention because when he did that thing with the blue paint, you could see that those arms lined up. I mean, I'm about the same area, but keep in mind he was the same height of just about the same height as John
Right.
O'Keefe was.
Right.
So obviously it would. But then again, there's still. I think the prosecutor, before this last week, I thought, hey, if he doesn't come up with a Hail Mary, this is over. It's going to be slam dunk not guilty for Karen Reed.
Right.
Now with his Hail Mary from a much better experts than Trooper Paul was, bless his heart. I think that the prosecution's in the game. I still think there's a lot of a doubt there. There's a lot of reasonable doubt,
Definitely.
but I don't think that the prosecution's out of the game at all, because who knows what a jury would say. So yeah, I think they got their Hail Mary. But yet, man, the defense is just starting. And boy, I tell you, there's some things happen this week
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to talk about in next week's podcast that will simply blow your mind. In fact, our title this next week is going to be the bombshell witness.
The bombshell witness.
There was a bombshell witness, and that's what we're going to talk about next week. The
Well,
bombshell witness, and it was it was one that was not in the first trial. So there's a
ooh,
lot of things in this trial that wasn't in the first trial. So if you think you said, "Hey, I saw the first trial. All this is just the same old stuff," it's not, man.
no.
There's a lot of new information here that crime junkies will just latch on to. So I can't wait
So
for us to get the next one out.
the defense has a bombshell witness.
A
Wow.
bombshell witness. Yep.
Well, folks, there you
Yep.
go. You've got a
Yep.
teaser for this next podcast.
And it will really amaze you who that person is.
Ooh, even better.
Yeah.
Oh, it adds to the
Yeah,
suspense.
even better. Yeah.
All right.
All right, James. Tell the folks again where they can find us and sign us out of here. And folks, join us next week.
Yeah, well, folks, if you would please just click on that subscribe button or the like button, either one. That's one way of supporting us. Or also, you can go to our sponsor, peacemakernetwork.com, and become a badge member, BADGE, by simply subscribing there at peacemakernetwork.com. And also, we've got over 300 episodes here on YouTube, and we have over 200 on our website at charliecrimebuster.com as well. So feel free to go and binge-cast and do as much as you can. And you can also reach Charlie by emailing Charlie at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Or you can call us, 407-917-2211. Thank you.
So until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, stay safe, stay alert. Yep, for the life you save, it could be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. You can also support our first responders, military, and law enforcement communities at peacemakernetwork.com. Or subscribe to our YouTube channel using tag @CharlieCrimebuster. Even visit our Facebook page, facebook.com/CharlieCrimebuster. Or if you would like to make suggestions for future podcasts, please send your ideas to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you will join us next week for another exciting crime story with Charlie Crimebuster.